So the Philadelphia Eagles should absolutely be interested in Myles Garrett, but I do think there's a better idea out there for Howie Roseman this offseason when it comes to the edge position, and we'll get into it on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome into a Wednesday edition of the show. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. The Philadelphia Eagles are down in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine. Workouts begin tomorrow throughout Sunday, and then we have free agency coming up in less than a few weeks. The NFL Draft is less than 2 months away. It's crazy that it's been less than 3 weeks since the Philadelphia Eagles won Super Bowl 59, and yet here we are, thrust into the thick of the offseason. And that's just the way it works when you win a championship. And if the Eagles want to win another championship in 2025, I do think they have to add more to their edge group. I don't think there's any way that Josh Sweat is back next year. I think he's going to cash in. I think he'll get a little overpaid in the open market because of that legendary Super Bowl performance. He did have a really good season, led the Eagles in sacks with 8, had 2.5 in the Super Bowl, 27 years old. He's in his prime. I do think Sweat is going to sign elsewhere. I love Nolan Smith. I think he had a breakout year. He's a star. He's your top guy in the rotation next year. Jalon Hunt was breaking out in the playoffs. Year 2, I think he's going to take a big step. He's a breakout candidate like Nolan Smith was last year. But to bank on just those 2 guys, I don't think that's what the Eagles are going to do. They want to add another pass rusher, probably 2 more on the edge as part of a 3-4-man rotation. We'll see what happens with Bryce Huff. I'll get into that later on in the show, but they want to be 3-4 deep, and I do think they want to add another top-tier talent, whether it's through free agency, a trade, or through the draft at this position. And the obvious one is Myles Garrett. In a vacuum, I love the idea of trading for Myles Garrett. Who wouldn't? He's one of the best defensive players in NFL history. He's currently, I think, the best pass rusher in football, multiple-time Defensive Player of the Year. He's in his prime. Yes, he does turn 30 at the end of next season, but I think Myles Garrett has a lot of football left. In a vacuum, would he help the Eagles win another championship next year? Of course. We saw what adding a bona fide star in their prime can do for this team when they brought in A.J. Brown in 2022. We saw it again when they brought in Saquon Barkley in 2024. I think there's a feeling of freshness, of newness, of a new excitement, like a new story when you bring in this kind of player, when it's the same core trying to run it back, trying to keep a window open. I think that's an important part of this, and he's just such a dominant force. Just imagine pairing him up with Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith and Jalon Hunt and another draft pick and a loaded class of defensive linemen. Myles Garrett in a vacuum, yeah, I would give up a first-round pick for him like they did for A.J. Brown. I'd probably even give the Cleveland Browns another day 2 pick, maybe 2 of them, and a player. Like if it took a first-round pick, Nakobe Dean, and I don't know, a 3rd rounder, and maybe another pick as well, would I do it? Probably. But at the same time, if it does cost multiple first-round picks, I think I'm out on that. I think I would much rather, if I'm going to use my draft assets, my ammunition, to go for a quality edge rusher, like an impact star player at this position, whether it's, again, a proven commodity that's through free agency or through a trade or it's through the draft, I kind of like the idea of like trading up for a top-tier draft prospect that won't cost you as much. I think, especially in the timeline of this Eagles window they're in, where they have a lot of, and Howie Roseman mentioned this, like a lot of young players are going to have to step up because they have a lot of guys in their prime, especially on offense, that are on top-tier contracts. And the older this roster gets on defense, that's only going to continue. You're going to have to eventually pay Jalen Carter. You're going to have to pay Nolan Smith. You're going to have to pay Zach Baun this offseason, eventually Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. The older that defense gets, the more expensive it's going to be. And so this is the time to sustain success when it's so important to get inexpensive top-tier production like they did get from their number 1 defense last year. The majority of that number 1 defense was pretty inexpensive. Most of those guys were on rookie contracts or on tier 2, tier 3 deals like Reed Blankenship and Zach Bond and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson even isn't really making, like, he's not making Xavier McKinney money from the open market last year. To do that again, to keep this window open, as you now have to start paying some of those defensive players, you have to bring in more talent through the draft. And so I like the idea, if I'm going to spend some money, if I'm going to use some draft capital, maybe instead of like trading 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett, if that's what it takes, let's say a Jalon Walker falls outside the top 15, or a James Pearce from Tennessee, who I absolutely love this year. Like, I just think he's the perfect Josh Sweat replacement. Let's say a Mykell Williams, another Georgia star edge rusher, falls a little bit. Is it likely? No. I think all 3 of those players should be top 10 picks, top 15 selections. At the same time, do we think Jalen Carter would fall where he did? Do we think Nolan Smith would fall? Every year. Do we think Quinyon Mitchell last year was going to fall where he did, or Cooper DeJean? Every single year there's draft prospects that you think are going to go in a certain spot, and they fall or they rise for completely different reasons, because every team's draft board is different. Everybody's evaluation process is different. So, yes, in a vacuum, I would absolutely love to trade for Myles Garrett. I do think Howie Roseman could find a way to make it work financially. I just think it's worth it. Myles Garrett on this super team, that's one of the most talented teams in NFL history. And I do think that would help you win a Super Bowl next year. And I'm not just like, I would take him for free. I would trade a first-round pick for Myles Garrett. I would trade, if it took pick 32 and a second-rounder and a player, like, I would probably do it. I'd probably pull the trigger. But if it's going to cost you the farm, I'm not doing that. If it's going to cost you multiple ones, I like the idea instead of, if, again, you want to be aggressive in adding an edge rusher this year, and you are willing to spend some draft capital, I kind of like the idea more of moving up in the draft for one of these players. And it is a deep class. You could probably sit at 32 and heck, even trade down and find a pretty good player here. But I would rather monitor the situation with the top tier edge prospects and take that route versus trading all of your draft ammunition for Myles Garrett. Because again, I think with where the Eagles are as a team, it is, and we saw it last year how important it can be, it is very, very important to continue to add more talent, instant contributors that are on inexpensive contracts. 4 years of team-controlled, cheap money. Like, I think that's really important, and if you can get a top-tier prospect to fall in that 15 to 25 range, I'd be willing to move up. I'd be willing, and that's not going to cost you. It's going to cost you a good amount, but it's not going to cost you 2 first-round picks, a first, a second, a third, a player like Nakobe Dean. It's not going to cost you that. It'd be a little pricey to move up because you're moving up from the last pick in the first round, let's say, to some, you're moving up maybe 10 to 20 spots. Like, yeah, that's going to cost you a little bit. But it's also not going to cost you the giant contract, the giant cap hits that Myles Garrett will cost you. So, yeah, of course, I'm not an idiot. Of course Myles Garrett would help the Eagles this year. And I'd be all in on it. Like, it's not a move that you should be concerned would be like a Nnamdi Asomugha of the Dream Team or bringing in DeMarco Murray. Like, no, I think, and Howie said it the other day, like, they're going to call on all players that are available. It has to make sense from a cap perspective. It has to make sense from a perspective of where the team is now. Is Myles Garrett a little bit older than what Saquon was when the Eagles signed him? What A.J. Brown was when they traded for him? Of course, he's definitely an older player. But pass rushers, that's the other thing. It's what position he's at. This is not a running back. This is an edge rusher. Edge rushers do age pretty well. Look at Brandon Graham. Like, look how good of football he's still playing. And he could still play in year 16, but he's likely to retire. Myles Garrett, you could probably get for another 4 to 5, maybe 6 really good years still. That's worth it. If you get 2 to 3 elite Myles Garrett years, I think it'll be worth what it costs to get him, because I think he will help you win another championship. So, yeah, of course, I'm in on Myles Garrett. But, again, if it was one scenario versus the other, let's say there's a good chance that Jalon Walker, James Pearce, Mykell Williams, one of those edge rushers falls, I'd rather try to trade up for one of those guys. If, again, both things were possible. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, it sounds like the NFL, yet again, or at least some teams are proposing to ban it. The tush push, the play, its life is at stake yet again. I'm going to tell you why the NFL would be completely soft in removing this play. We'll get into it coming up next on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, so yet again, 2 years in a row, because the Eagles have been unstoppable with this play, the NFL is looking into banning the tush push. The Green Bay Packers are the team that proposed the Eagles should not be able to run this play anymore, as will the rest of the NFL be banned from using the tush push, the brotherly shove, whatever you want to call it. I honestly thought when I heard an NFL team propose this ban that it was the Washington Commanders, considering the offsides fiasco of the NFC Championship. But no, it was the Green Bay Packers. And I think the NFL has no logical reason to ban the brotherly shove, to ban the tush push. It really just, to me, doesn't make any sense. And yes, I do understand that the NFL does not like automation in their game. They do not like when teams try to cheat the system. It's an entertainment business before anything else, of course. I understand that. And if you have a play that's automatic, a lot of times they try to take that out of the game, unless it's an extra point. If it's gimmicky, they try to take it out of the game, which I do understand that to a degree. But the thing is, with this play, it is not unstoppable for all 32 teams. Look at the Buffalo Bills in the AFC Championship trying to run it with the biggest quarterback in the NFL. Josh Allen is what? 6'5", 6'6", 230-plus pounds. He's one of the most powerful quarterbacks in NFL history. And the Kansas City Chiefs stopped it multiple times to get to Super Bowl 59. The Green Bay Packers, the team that proposed the ban, had their quarterback slip before the ball was even snapped, and he ran his face into the backside of his right guard before he could even get the ball. Like, this play doesn't work for everybody. The Baltimore Ravens, they try it with a tight end. They use Mark Andrews in this play, and it doesn't always work. The Philadelphia Eagles have perfected this play, but you shouldn't ban a play because one team is really good at it. And I would argue that the push part of the play isn't even the most effective part of it. I think the most effective part of what makes it so unstoppable for the Eagles is they have one of the greatest offensive lines in NFL history in front of a quarterback that can squat 600 pounds. I got news for you. If you remove the push part of this play, if it's 3rd and 1 and Jalen Hurts is ramming up the gut behind that offensive line, I got news for you. He's still going to convert those plays 99% of the time. On the 1-yard line in the red zone, on 3rd or 4th and 1 or inches, he's going to get that. He's going to get that yard. That's the strength of this play. Yes, it helps a little bit that you have a Saquon Barkley and a Dallas Goedert pushing him forward. Of course, it gives you a little boost, but that's not the strength of the play. And again, if all 32 teams were using this and they were using it way too much, and it was taking away from the entertainment value of the game, I'd understand it. Even if it was just the Eagles using this play a lot, but they were doing it on 1st and 10 to set up a 2nd and 6, and they do it multiple times on a drive when it's not a short yardage situation, and they were trying to cheat the system because they do average 4 yards a pop on these plays. They could feasibly try to do it an entire drive and get down the field, and it might work. And the NFL doesn't want that. I would understand it if that's what the Eagles were doing. But it just does not take away enough of an actual game to warrant a ban. It's only used in obvious short yardage situations and when they're on the 1-yard line in the red zone. Even when they're on the 2 or 3, they're not using it. A lot of the times they're running it with Saquon Barkley, or they're in shotgun. They're going to run a QB draw or a counter read. They're running other plays. It's only in a few different obvious situations where other teams will run a sneak anyway. If you're afraid of taking away the entertainment value, I got news for you. A tush push is equally as entertaining as a 1-yard run from a running back. You know what I mean? I don't think it does, and it impacts the game in a negative way enough to get rid of it. And if it's an injury perspective, I heard Sean McDermott, who's a hypocrite, by the way, saying that the play should be banned, considering the Bills run it more than anybody except for the Eagles, saying it's about the health of the players. Okay, well, that's hypocritical, considering you run it more than anybody, so clearly you don't care that much about the health of the players, if that's the reason for it. Show me the stats that the tush push causes all these injuries. I've been watching the Eagles run this play for 3 seasons now, and can we even count on one hand how many times a player got injured during this play? The Eagles are the ones that could get injured more than the defense with this play. Jalen Hurts has never been injured. The offensive line is rarely, and they're the ones on the ground of this play. Everybody else is falling on top of the offensive lineman. Jason Kelce never got injured. Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, the guards, Landon Dickerson, like these guys didn't get injured during this play. Like, show me the stats that say this play is so much more dangerous than other ones where it should be removed. I just think it's ridiculous. I think it's soft, and I think teams just don't like that they can't stop it. Like, if you don't want the Eagles running this play, then stop letting them get to 3rd and 1, 4th and inches. Like, obvious short yardage situations. Don't let them get down to the 1-yard line in the red zone. Stop them before. Force it to be 3rd and 6 and make Jalen Hurts throw the football. Make them give Saquon Barkley the ball. You can't. That's why the Eagles use this so much more than other teams as well, is because they're such a good 1st and 2nd down football team. So miss me with getting rid of the tush push. I think it would be unbelievably soft for the NFL to do this. And I honestly think, again, the push is just not even that much a part of the play. Like, Jalen Hurts a lot of the time has already moved the sticks before like one of the push players gets their hands on him. Again, he squats 600 pounds. This is one of the most powerful lower body. This is one of the quarterbacks that have the most power in their lower body in NFL history. Like, that's Jalen Hurts. Him, Cam Newton, Josh Allen. Like, he's up there as one of the most powerful runners at the quarterback position. And the offensive line has, like, what, over 1,000 pounds of pure muscle power up front? Like, go ahead and remove it. That's the thing, is they shouldn't, and it would be soft. They have no logical reason to remove the ban, but I really, like, if they do, it's not going to hurt the Eagles. They are still going to run the QB sneak with Jalen Hurts in short yardage situations, and maybe the percentage drops a little bit. Maybe teams will have a couple more chances. Like, they'll stop the Eagles in those spots a few more times, but they're still going to get it over 90% of the time. So I'm not too concerned no matter what. I don't think the NFL will ban it, but if they do, I'm not really too worried about it from an Eagles perspective. But I think it'd be really soft if they did. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I do want to go back to the edge rusher position. We touched on it very briefly at the end of our offseason simulation yesterday on Locked On Eagles. What do the Eagles do with Bryce Huff? I still think he's salvageable in Philadelphia. I don't think the Eagles will feel that way. I'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting. I was in on Luka Doncic's revenge game yesterday against the Dallas Mavericks. I took the over on a lot of his stats, and I won pretty big through FanDuel. Luka Doncic revenge game against Dallas, that was a fun one to watch. Again, whether you're backing your team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you never feel like you missed your chance through FanDuel. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so the Eagles, like I said earlier in the show, they need to add more edge rushers. If it's Nolan Smith and Jalon Hunt next year as your top two, like, I'm pretty happy with that. I think Jalon Hunt is going to break out in year 2. I think they will sign another free agent. Even if they don't trade for a Myles Garrett and Josh Sweat walks, I do think there are some other guys in the second, third tier that you can bring in and they can replace that production. not at 100%, but at a cheaper rate, you can replace that production by 60, 70%, maybe more. Like I think you could bring in a Malcolm Kuntz type of player, as I mentioned yesterday in the simulation, and I think you could get similar production to what you had with Josh Sweat, or even just like a Josh Uche or an Azeez Ojulari, Odiabo from the Colts. Like there's a lot of guys out there they can get for cheaper that I think will be good as that third or fourth man of the rotation. I think they're probably going to draft somebody too. I do think the Eagles are done with Bryce Huff. But I personally do think it is salvageable. Like I know Bryce Huff this year was really bad, and he ended the year as a healthy scratch. Like they decided we could have a four-man rotation. We prefer that a lot of the time on the edge. No, we're going to stick with the three men we have, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat, and Jalon Hunt eventually took over for Bryce Huff, who had just 2.5 sacks last year, started just 6 games, and only had 4 quarterback hits. He fell out of favor with Vic Fangio pretty early on in the season, just was not good against the run on first and second down, oftentimes looked lost out there. I don't want to say he looked disinterested and his effort wasn't there, but I think he was also injured, so I think that held him back a little bit, and he just never gained any momentum. It just felt like he just never fit in to what the coaches wanted. I don't know if he didn't fit in either, like mentally. It just seemed like I don't want to say he didn't want to be there, but I think his confidence did get shot pretty quickly. And I think he even was honest about it. He talked about how Vic Fangio said, going back to the spring and summer, there were concerns about Bryce Huff in this signing. Because Fangio, when he was asked in the summer about Bryce Huff, he said he's not there yet when it comes to, like, is he the star the Eagles expected him to be when they paid him? He said, no, like, he's not there yet. And Vic Fangio, we know, is very blunt. He's very brutally honest. And I think that got in Huff's head early. And he just, like, I thought there was some momentum after the bye week when they started to let him just put his hand in the dirt, put him back in, like, obvious pass rushing situations like he thrived in with the New York Jets. I thought he played pretty well at times against the Browns. Against the Cowboys, he had a good game. Against the Giants. Like, the first month after the bye week, I thought Huff looked good. But then he suffered that hand injury. And then when he came back, I think he lost the momentum again, and he fell out of favor. So I do think they'll probably move on. I think they'll probably trade him as a post-June 1st designation to free up about $4 to $5 million in cap space. I think a team that needs pass rushers, like I could see the Arizona Cardinals being interested in Huff. He's still young. Just 2 years ago, he had double-digit sacks. He had 10 sacks. He was top 3 in pass rush win rate for all edge rushers. Like, this is a guy that's proven in the NFL level he can have a top-tier pass rushing season. But I do think it won't be with the Eagles. There's just, I think, too many alternative options to upgrade. But I do think, personally, if they do, let's say, just make one big move through the draft or through free agency or through a trade for the edge rushing position, and you have that player, a draft pick or a free agent, or Myles Garrett, along with Nolan Smith and Jalon Hunt, a healthy Bryce Huff is that fourth guy. If you, again, just use him exclusively as a pass rusher in like third and long situations like the Jets did. Again, if you commit to that role for him, yeah, are you going to get your money's worth, what that contract was? No, you paid him $16 million a year to replace Hassan Riddick. He was supposed to be the guy last year. But I do personally think if they held on to him, he could still be a part of a 4-man rotation. I think he could effectively get to the quarterback if he's healthy. So I wouldn't hate it. And you could even, like, he could be your 4A, 4B. You could, let's say they draft a Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M in round 1. He's rotating in with Nolan Smith and Jalon Hunt, and then you sign like a Josh Uche. And you have Bryce Huff as well. And that's your 5 guys in the rotation. I still, like, I wouldn't just cut Bryce Huff. Like, it's not going to save you any money by cutting this guy. You're going to eat a ton of dead cap. So, yes, if there's a team that'll give you a draft pick for Bryce Huff, they'll give you a day 3 selection, then, yeah, you probably move on. I think he probably wants a change of scenery as well, and your coaches, Vic Fangio just doesn't seem like he trusts this guy. But I personally agree with Howie Roseman, who was asked about Bryce Huff during the playoffs, during Super Bowl week, and he said that, 1 year doesn't define this player. Like, he's still bullish, he's still stubborn, that this signing can pay off. Like, that Bryce Huff can still be a good player in Philadelphia. So maybe they do give him one more chance. I don't think it could hurt. Again, you're not going to be able to undo that contract. If you could free up $10 million in cap space tomorrow, get rid of him. He's not worth having as your third or fourth edge rusher. There's other guys you can get in a rotation that will replace him pretty easily. But you're already stuck here. If you can't really get a great draft pick and you want depth at the edge rushing position, I don't mind giving him another shot. Like, he was really, really good in 2023. And yeah, it was only really one breakout year, and you were paying him based on a projection that career season would continue, and it didn't. He kind of went back to who he was in 2022, 2021. But I did see enough flashes last year, the age, the 2023 season, the role's going to be a lot smaller, that I personally wouldn't hate holding on to. So I want them. I personally would say that I'd keep Bryce Huff in-house this year. What would I predict they do? I do think they try to trade him, even if for like a conditional 7th round pick. I think they will find a team that sees this as a low-risk, high-reward type of move. Instead of drafting somebody in the 7th round, let's give up a pick for this player, and let's see if he can get back to who he was in 2023. It sucks that this signing did not work. It's the only thing that didn't work for Howie Roseman last year. But I don't hate the idea, and I said this yesterday based on some of the moves I made on the defensive line in my free agency signings for the simulation. I don't hate the mindset behind bringing in Bryce Huff, because it was the same mindset for bringing in Haason Reddick, and that worked out. I like the idea of Howie Roseman targeting free agents that are like a year, you're targeting them a year too early, and they do this with their coaches too, a year too early rather than a year too late when they're super expensive. Like, they saw Bryce Huff, yeah, was he worth the contract he got? Probably not. They were projecting, though, that he would play so well the following year, he would outplay his contract, and then you have him on a team-friendly deal where he's vastly underpaid, like Haason Reddick was after 2022. Haason Reddick got a good, not great contract, and then after 2022, he earned a top-tier contract, which he just hasn't been able to get, which sucks for him. But that's just the reality of the NFL at times. They were trying to do the same thing with Bryce Huff, and I like that mentality. So just because, and this is what I've always said about Howie Roseman, sometimes the execution hasn't been there, and he deserves accountability for that. Like, you got to actually be right on these moves. But I've always liked his philosophies. I've always loved the mindset behind most moves he makes. The logic behind most of them are pretty sound. And the Bryce Huff move, even though it hasn't worked, and he likely won't be back next year, even though I'd give him a chance, I do like the idea they had behind it, and I wouldn't be deterred from that move being a bust from trying it again. Like, if they see another young player that's maybe a year away from a breakout, that's a little bit cheaper on a contract you can get this year, go for that player. Like, I do like that idea. And especially with how much money you're spending on this team right now on offense, like, that's a good strategy to maintain, especially on the defensive side of the football. So I would personally keep Bryce Huff for one more year, but I think Philadelphia will probably try to. I just don't think he's Vic Fangio's guy, and Vic Fangio's not going anywhere. So I say they probably trade him for a conditional day 3 selection for a pass rush needy team. Interesting, though, to see what happens with Bryce Huff. Let me know what you think they should do. Should they trade for Myles Garrett? What should they trade for him? What to do with Bryce Huff? Let me know on X at DiBiase-LOE. Hit us up on the YouTube community page as well. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure, guys, your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with my guys Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez. Make that your second listen as the NFL Scouting Combine is here in Indianapolis. Get ready for all the prospect workouts with Locked On NFL Draft. Louie DiBiase signing off. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.